Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are here to discuss part one or act one of the Hitchcock Hotel, so we hope that you will join us. We have a couple of things to cover before we get into our discussion, though. The first being our book for next month. So remember, we are switching gears, we are switching seasons. We're going to go into our translated works, and our first one will be Inkheart. Remember, if you want information about our later months for the translations, all of that information will be in the description below. And the next thing that we need to talk about is the bookish bite. So I have a question for you this week, Leandra. And I don't think we've discussed this before. I would like to talk to you about unlikable characters. Is this something that you hate? Is it something that you are just indifferent to? Let me know. Is it possible for you to like a book if you don't like any of the characters?
This is a good one because we also need to provide a separation between unlikable characters and morally gray characters, characters who behave badly or maybe do some things we wouldn't approve of, but we still find them likable potentially. But an unlikable character means that maybe it's their personality, it could be their actions. There are many reasons why you just might not like someone, just like in real life. There are times when you just don't get along with someone and there's no rhyme or reason. And I would say that I can live with an unlikable character depending on how they function within the narrative. If it's necessary for them to be unlikable, I do think that certain genres have a higher chance of including unlikable characters within their cast versus others. I'd be interested to hear your own thoughts about that, Danny, because of course, my initial thoughts are thrillers. Thrillers always have a list of unlikable characters, and I'm just like, can't we root for someone? Can't we be okay with someone versus them all being just a little bit dirty? Like there's always something that they have done wrong, and their moral compass is just kind of out the wazoo. I would probably say that after that, maybe we see it in horror. Horror can have unlikable characters at times, mainly because if we're thinking of the classic reason for why a monster might target certain characters, it's kind of like the morally bad character typically gets the worst death, arguably. And so again, there's a function, there's a reason why we have an unlikable character. But honestly, I would prefer to like all my characters. That's my preference. I understand why they exist though, and it doesn't necessarily make or break a novel all the time. What do you think, Danny?
Yeah, I would say that I can like a book with unlikable characters. I don't know that I've ever loved a book with unlikable characters.
Mm.
And it probably depends too on how prevalent they are in the story. Are they the main character? Are they side characters? Are all of the characters unlikable? I mean, there's so many variables that can come into play. But yeah, I definitely want it to be purposeful. If it's just unlikable for unlikability's sake, I'm probably going to get more frustrated at the book than anything. But there are certain storylines that I do think it's necessary. I get a little bogged down if I don't have anything else to like hold on to. If
Mm-hmm.
I don't have either any other characters that I can kind of find redeeming qualities in, or like a creative narrative, something else about the story that I can just really, really enjoy. And it's interesting that you brought up genres because I 100% agree that thrillers, oftentimes thrillers do not have likable characters for me anyway. I don't like the thriller genre in general for me is something that I have found I don't enjoy a lot of because I do feel like it's just bad people doing bad things for bad reasons. And that on top, like one on top of another on top of another, I get a little bored and irritated. And you do find it in the horror genre as well, but I think that maybe what saves that genre for me is that it's usually the creativity that comes along with some of the horror novels that I have read and loved. A lot of the horror novels that I enjoy kind of dabble in the fantasy realm or paranormal realm, and so they have to be a little bit more creative by nature because we're not just talking about humans being bad people. Um, so yeah, I think that it's not something that would completely turn me off of a book if someone said they're unlikable characters, but it is something I think I'm a little more leery of than some other things that could happen in books.
Yeah, I completely agree. And obviously, this makes sense for our discussion today as we enter the Hitchcock Hotel, because we get quite a few personalities in this novel as we get into the summary of this first act. And yeah, quite a few of them, I would say, are universally unlikable. We're not meant to view them as people we would like to see as our best friends or that we necessarily root for automatically. But before we get into that, let me provide a summary for Act One. And that's also where we do have to provide this type of warning that we will be spoiling everything that happens in the first 100 pages of this book. If you read it, perfect, stick around. If you haven't gotten that far yet, it's totally fine for you to pause here, go off, finish those pages, and come back just to your own comfort level and what you think counts as a spoiler, because really we're only talking about the first 33% of the book, but that's still a pretty good chunk of it. So you've been warned, you've been warned, and now it's time for me to provide a summary. So, with this book, obviously, we have the title that is quite significant, the Hitchcock Hotel. And this hotel is celebrating its 1 year anniversary since its grand opening. The proprietor, the owner of the hotel, is Alfred Smedel. He is a huge Hitchcock fan for obvious reasons, because that is his namesake. His mother named him after this director, and we know that it ended up being a very significant part of his life growing up, because his mother and he would rewatch these films throughout his entire childhood, and so they obviously have a dear place in his heart. But the beginning of this book opens with him waiting for his very special guests, and those guests are people that he knew from college. This hotel is actually located in the same town as the college where they all attended, Wrobel College, and they were a close knit group of friends, which is a classic trope that we see quite a bit. However, it's clear from the get go that these characters are no longer as close as they were. Specifically, none of them are close to Alfred. So the question is, why is he inviting them to this free, all expenses paid trip to visit him for the weekend, visit his hotel, celebrate this anniversary with him? And obviously, there are suggestions that he had some sinister intentions. He doesn't seem to really want to enjoy the weekend with them and patch things up. It seems like it could be a weekend of revenge, but with every character that arrives, we know that they all have secrets, they all have regrets, and all of them are quite uncomfortable with their interactions with Alfred, which adds to the tension of this entire atmosphere. I believe I've provided pretty much a good general summary of what's happened so far, because the weekend has just begun. All of the characters have arrived, and we are slowly still getting to know every single character and what their intentions are. But what did you think so far, Danny? And is there anything you want to add?
I don't think I have anything to add to the summary, but I do want to jump in to the characters since that's kind of where we started our bookish bite. So I'd like to talk about Alfred first and my first impressions of him. Because I do find Alfred unlikable to a certain extent. I find him a little persnickety at times, and I obviously, we're gonna find out reasons for why he feels the way that he does about this group of individuals, that he has invited into his home. I do think that in this case, his unlikableness have has kind of added to the eeriness of the storyline. I think that the unlikableness of the other characters is going to make it a little hard for me to care if something happens about, like, to them. But we'll see where it goes from here. I do feel like we've gotten a lot of character backstories, which I have appreciated in this. I know that we had originally talked about, is this going to be more thriller versus mystery horror? Where's the line there? And I do think with some of the thriller stories that I have read in the past that I haven't really enjoyed, a lot of character development is missing. And so I was pleasantly surprised to see that we're getting some backstories mixed in, some flashbacks mixed in with this group of characters to really understand their dynamic. And I know that it's eventually leading up to the breaking point of this group of friends.
Right. I know that it's interesting to kind of compare this idea of unlikability because I think it's a different type. The reason why we don't like Alfred is he is the villain, at least at the
Yeah,
moment. We're not meant to like the bad guy. You
right.
know, I know that there are all these books out there that are like inversions of this and then changing things up. But in reality, we really aren't supposed to like the villain. So I totally accepted. He's creepy. He makes me uncomfortable. Do I feel badly for him at times? Yes. And I do think that that adds some type of layering to his character because of how he grew up, how that ended up making him the man that he is. And also, obviously, there are things that happened in college that we will eventually have revealed. But at the moment, I'm feel like I'm not going to be surprised. I'm not going to be surprised when we find out that they've done something horrible to him. With
Yeah.
that said, there is some weird tension between him and Zoe. It seems like Zoe is suggesting that she saw him kill someone. And so that obviously brings up so many questions. What was the context? What is going on? Is it linked to the horrible event that they may have done to him? I don't know. Especially because we also have a lot of secrets surrounding him. The fact that he wears turtlenecks, whatever that was, happened
Yeah.
pre-college. So it's not even related to what they did. I assumed that when we discovered that he mostly wears turtlenecks and that everyone was going to reference it, I thought it was going to be because of the a quote unquote accident or something that happened at their senior year. But in reality, it's something that happened way beforehand. So that adds a bit of a, strange layer, more questions that obviously his friends don't even know about. And I say friends loosely because they're obviously not his friends at the moment. To switch back to the other group of characters that you were talking about, their unlikability, Zoe, Samira, I think may be the most likable one out of the group. She also is kind of the kindest. So maybe that's why we can see that she's the people pleaser, the person who almost has middle child syndrome where they just don't want anyone to argue. They're trying to ease the tension whenever they can. So that seems to be Samira's role. It makes sense that not only do we find her the most likable, but she's obviously the most likable amongst the friend group. They all
Yeah.
know what her role is and that she always means well. Whereas Grace, she's a character that the more I kind of learn about her, I'm very suspicious of her and I don't find her likable. TJ, Julius, none of them are likable. And this is part of what makes it really hard when everyone is unlikable, especially the people that are obviously being coerced. They're being tricked into coming on this weekend. Clearly, there is an intent to harm them in some way, whether it be physical, mental, emotional. And the problem that comes with an unlikable cast of characters is that I care when things happen to them. I don't think so. I think Samira, I might feel badly because I haven't really seen her do anything crazy. But in reality, that's the issue that I come up against is if someone dies or is harmed or feels threatened or they're afraid, I won't be afraid for them. And that's where I am a little bit worried about moving forward. But I agree, these characters are far more fleshed out than I expected.
Yeah, I feel like the unlikability depletes the tension and maybe the
Mm.
suspense in the story because I don't care. Um, when we're looking at which this is just a specific scene, but we have Alfred, we find out that Alfred has little peek holes in everyone's bedrooms essentially, and he sees Grace and TJ in a love affair that he did not realize was happening, and they don't want other people to know, but they still make the decision to be together in this very small group of people in this hotel, which is dumb in and of itself. But when he's standing there watching this scene, there's supposed to be suspense there, right? Like we have this really creepy person who obviously means harm watching this scene. I'm like, I don't care. This just proves that both of these people are horrible individuals. So I guess the one kind of saving grace, at least for that scene for me, was Alfred kind of standing out in the hallway waiting for TJ to come and like dropping a hint to essentially tell him that like I heard your conversation and I know like what you did. And I do like those little snippets. I think that that does add to the tension, but I still can't find a care to like feel bad for Grace or TJ in that situation.
No, and I think it ended up bringing up more questions about Alfred's intentions because he did do a lot of research on
Oh
these
yeah,
characters. Danny, his housekeeper, who we haven't mentioned just yet, was quizzing him to make sure he knew Zoe's favorite drink or what the names of Samira's children were. TJ, I think he's a character that Alfred wasn't expecting in, I don't know, some type of form. I think he either had lowered his expectations of this person and now he's like, oh, either he's a threat or he may actually play a bigger role, because at one point we are in his perspective. It's chapter 12, and it's when they discover that TJ has a gun with him, that he brought a gun on this weekend trip. And now Alfred is speaking with Danny in confidence about this, what it means for their plans, which we don't fully know just yet. But it says that TJ has become a more viable candidate than I would have thought. What does that mean, Alfred? What are you talking about? So that was eerie. There are moments where I'm like, ugh, I that's really creepy, and now I'm trying to rearrange what I'm expecting for this
yeah,
weekend and how he wants the weekend to end. But that also brings up an interesting fact that I use first person, something I didn't expect, because we're getting Alfred's POV through first person POV, but we're also getting other characters' perspectives. It's always third person. So we've had Zoe so far, we had Samira, and then at the very end, we had TJ. And I wasn't expecting that. When we were kind of having a back and forth between Zoe's POV and then Alfred's, I thought that might just be the two POVs we get. How do you
yeah.
feel about this structure? Are you glad that we've got multiple POVs? Do you think it's done well? Or what are your thoughts initially?
I like having multiple POVs in a scenario where, in a mystery scenario, I don't want to just follow one character because I feel like there's too many missing pieces for me. And I also think that it makes the book have to be, or the author have to be a little bit more creative in the information they give, the scenes that they show with specific characters, because they obviously don't want to give away the game too early. And so I've enjoyed that aspect. The bad thing about it is we are in the heads of people who are unlikable. And so to kind of not to harp on that concept, but I do think that that's something that when I'm in certain individuals' heads, I'm like, ugh, I really don't like you. But I do like the information gathering aspect of having multiple POVs. And honestly, I didn't even notice the change in tenses, and that is something I have enjoyed in books before. So I'm glad that you pointed it out, because I'll have to pay attention now getting into it. That's something that Andrea Stewart did with the Bone Shard Daughter. She had two main characters that were in first person, and everyone else was in third. And I find it interesting, and I wonder why authors make those certain choices. I don't know if it's because they're trying to, like in this case, is this author trying to make us empathize with Alfred? Is that why we're being put in his perspective, to try and allow us to see through his eyes? I don't know. I don't know what the reasoning for it is, but I do typically enjoy it whenever authors play with tenses. How about you?
Yeah, I love to talk about POV and narration style and everything. So of course that was immediately something that I noticed. And I agree with you. There could be this desire to empathize with the villain or just simply separate him further. He's
Yeah.
already an outsider from this group. He's not like them. And so the fact that we get the villain's first person POV, his reactions and internal monologue in comparison to Zoe and the other characters, it may just be that way of inverting this expectation of horror and mystery and thriller elements mixed together. I do wonder how we're going to go with the multiple POVs of other characters, because it was a little bit surprising when we suddenly got Samira. And I was like, okay, well, we've got Samira. This is making me assume that it would be a bit odd to just get Zoe and Samira and then periodically Alfred in first person POV. So now that we've got TJ, we can confirm that, at least I'm assuming, we're going to get Grace and Julius. And I think I like those two characters the least, actually. I mean, Zoe isn't great either. She's quite dysfunctional, I think, is her big issue. And that leads her to just be a bit destructive for herself and others. Meanwhile, we have TJ, who's a bit more of a sentimentalist, and he has all of these feelings for Grace, even though he realizes that he's helping her commit infidelity, and she has no intention of really leaving her husband and her perfect life. And Julius, I'm wondering if we're going to end up realizing that he's ill or something. What is he doing? Because they were saying that he's quite thin. He's gotten quite thin. He also is getting a bit more sentimental than expected. He started tearing up. He was crying at one point or something to that effect. That might be a bit dramatic, but he was tearing up. And then now him offering this well-intentioned, potentially, but really poorly executed olive branch to Alfred, saying, hey, I would like to invest in you and provide you this grant, suggesting that it wouldn't be a loan. There would be no expectation of getting money back. So I'm wondering if, Julius is going to be a character where we discover he's terminally ill or something to that effect. But specifically, I want to actually talk about Grace, because it seems as though she knows more than she's revealed to anyone else, because Alfred has a deal with her to behave in a certain way and get everyone else to the hotel. So what do you think is going on with that relationship?
So before I jump into that, I do want to just mention, so you had talked about like us gaining all of the POVs, and the last two that are left are Grace and Julius. I think one of those is going to be murdered.
Hmm.
And so I think that we're going to get everyone's POV except for whoever is murdered. And I don't know if that's why we're like stair step progressing, or maybe we're going to get that person's perspective when they die. I'm not exactly sure, but that's kind of my theory at the moment. But yeah, I do. So there is this weird tension between Grace and Alfred. There was a moment, so we had them at dinner, and Alfred made a comment. I can't remember exactly what happened right before it, but he made a comment about how he wished Grace would play along more. And then when that happened, I started thinking about the fact that Grace is the one who emailed back first. So she's essentially the linchpin or whatever for everyone else, like the dominoes kind of following, and them all coming on this retreat. Because Zoe said at the very beginning that she would not have come. Like she was going to email and say like, this doesn't work for me. I can't do this. And essentially go off into the abyss and never talk to Alfred again. But since Grace replied, everyone else kind of followed suit. Even TJ said that the only reason he is at this hotel is because of Grace. And so she definitely has a bigger role to play. I don't know that she knows exactly what Alfred is doing. Clearly, she doesn't know that he's got a peephole in her room. At least I hope. That would be a weird twist to find out that she knows about it. But so there's definitely some oddities there. What do you think about their relationship?
Well, I was thinking that he obviously has something over her, maybe blackmailing her, because why else would she be playing along? She has a lot to lose, arguably. Among all of these characters, she's the one who has the most put together life, that's a bit more at the center, the perfect family. She works for a hedge fund. There's just a lot riding on her, preventing from any type of scandal going into the papers, or the papers nowadays. What even is that phrase? But you know what I mean. So I think that he has something over her. He's blackmailing her. There's something potentially from their past, or as he's shown, he's kept tabs on people. So I think that there's something she's desperately afraid will be revealed, because there's no other reason why she would go along with this and push the other characters to attend the weekend. The question is how much does she know about the weekend? What did he
Yeah.
tell her that his goal was? That's the thing, where she may have more knowledge than everyone else, but I think that he probably is still lying to her. just to make sure that she stays in line and performs the way that he expects her. What's weird about their relationship is that it's thanks to her that they're even all friends when it comes to Alfred's participation in it. He was the one who noticed in class at one point at college that she was writing down film lines, and he approached her, got into a discussion, and they became fast friends who were obsessed with film. And so that's what brought Alfred into the fold, and they became this group, this unit at college. So I am fascinated to learn more about that, because really none of this would have happened if he didn't have this connection with Grace. He is obsessed with her. He has this uncomfortable infatuation with her, and I'm wondering how far that will be pushed, especially now that he realizes that she is with TJ. Meanwhile, we have some history between TJ and Zoe. So I think we have some, worries that there'll be some romantic entanglements, or at least some, arguments, some outbursts, conflicts that are inspired by hurt feelings because everyone's a little bit connected. It seems as though Samira and Julius are on the outskirts of any type of romantic issues. But you know what? Because this has a lot of thriller elements, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up discovering that everybody's having an affair with everybody and everything else is happening. But so far, I agree with you that someone's going to die. I would assume. I just don't know who it's going to be, because I feel as though there's a good chance whenever you get multiple POVs in this type of tense horror thriller, you're expecting someone to die because we've got a plethora of POVs. We can
Right.
lose one, and the fun is that you don't know yet who it's going to be. I'm wondering if it's going to be Julius. I could see Julius dying first, just because he doesn't really bring much more to the story beyond him being a party boy, someone who came from money, and he deems himself a philanthropist. That is his quote unquote job. What a job that is. And that he was one of the biggest bullies for Alfred. And so I could see if someone's going to die first, it's going to be him. Although we've seen a threat. Zoe saw grass on her pillow. And then when she went to tell Samira about it, they came back to her room. The grass was gone. And the grass is significant because they were reminiscing the night before at dinner about the Olds, this elderly couple, and how they assumed that the wife killed the husband. And Alfred ended up going on this entire spiel about how the husband was killed by the wife because she just fed him grass. She just kept feeding him grass until he finally died. And also, the grounds that they live on, the hotel, was previously owned by them. So then the question is, if this story is true, whose room was he murdered in? Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that little bit of lore along with the house. I thought it was very fun. I think it adds an another layer to the creepiness of this mansion. And yeah, with her having grass on her pillow, we also had the moment to add to the creepiness of the story where Samira is showering and there's someone standing in her hotel room, which I originally thought was Alfred, but why would he stand in her hotel room? I mean, unless it's just to creep her out. But why would he stand in her hotel room when he has peepholes in everyone's room? He doesn't need to stand in her hotel room to see her. So that makes me feel like it was somebody else. But yeah, there are lots of bits and bobs, like smatterings of things that I've really enjoyed about the story. The lore behind it, his relationship with Danny. So like you mentioned, what does Grace know? Why is Grace going along with this? Does he have something over her? I don't think that about Danny. I think that she's just being for some reason protective of Alfred and going along with it. I've enjoyed that dynamic. The fact that she searched through everyone's bags at the beginning, which is how she found the gun. Like she's done a lot of things that I'm like, this is not normal behavior for a housekeeper. And then we also have the elements within the hotel itself, which I don't know a lot about Hitchcock. That's not something that I have a lot of experience with, but they have done, I think this author's done a good job of explaining like what little pieces of Hitchcock are in the hotel. We have obviously the aviary where we have the birds. We have the discussion of milk, which I don't know where that comes from, but that was something that they mentioned was a Hitchcock thing. I like the little elements, the details that have been put in to the storyline, even the owl. And I think it was an owl, the fake owl or whatever. And Alfred was talking about it, and he was like, it's not actually a fake bird, or it's not actually a real bird, because that would be weird to have a real bird stuffed. But he has one in the attic along with all of his items. And he's like, I felt bad for throwing it away. And so it's now in the attic. There are just lots of little elements like that that I think make the hotel very realistic, or not realistic, but like real. I feel like I'm in it.
Right. And honestly, the memorabilia, all of the money that he has placed into gathering these items is really fascinating. It just goes to show you how expensive collecting stuff like that. I think there was something that they collected that cost $20,000. He owns the typewriter that was used to write the script, I believe, for Psycho. There's also the mention of the staircase, which I knew was going to be a reference because I knew that that's really important in Vertigo. What's actually really interesting, and this is completely kind of going off the rails and not discussing the book itself, but the number of references to films that, of course, are leaning Hitchcock because Hitchcock made a film about them, a lot of them are books. Many of them start off as stories. So, for instance, The Birds, we mentioned this, I think, in our introduction, our hype episode, that this was a short story by Daphne du Maurier. Strangers on a Train, I didn't even realize that that was part of the Hitchcock canon, but that's by Patricia Highsmith, a well-known thriller mystery writer who also, I believe, created Mr. Ripley. And so all of these mentions, I was like, this is interesting that this author hasn't yet really kind of dropped that mention. I'm wondering if that would be a fun little Easter egg or a bit of a poke and jab at Alfred Smedel, saying, you're idolizing this man, when a lot of the stories at their heart are actually written by women and also just authors in general. That would be really interesting. Oh, I hope that happens. I really do. But anyways, to get back to Alfred, what's really interesting about bringing up this stuffed owl that's not really an owl, and then the reveal that he does have a stuffed bird that was once a bird, a crow, that he's really uncomfortable by it. I think that's genuine, that he doesn't like the idea of a stuffed real life being. And so that's why he won't showcase it, even though he feels badly about a fan, someone who went to the hotel, loved their experience, and thought he'd appreciate it. But in that same moment, I don't know if you remember, that he says, "Ugh, gross, I would never showcase this bird." He takes a dead fly and smashes it in his fingers
Yeah.
until it's paste. That's literally the quote. And I was like, that is disgusting and also kind of doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I did notice that because it was such a almost visceral, like, point, because it smashes it into paste, and I'm like, "Why? Why are we doing
Ugh,
that?"
stop.
And that was when, that was actually a pretty cool scene because he was up in the attic looking out at, I think it was Samira went out to her car to get her book, and he was just observing the grounds, and that was before we knew he had the peep show thing. Not peep show, but, like, the peepholes in
His
everyone's
own
room.
personal peep show.
Yes. But he was discussing how, he likes to observe people's lives without them knowing. And there was a discussion that he has with himself about how when people are being watched, they usually don't like being watched, and they will sometimes change their behaviors because of being watched. And I did find that perspective really interesting to think about, especially in reference with, movies and people putting into action these items. Like, they know that people are obviously going to be watching. That's the whole purpose of film, is to have it be watched. And so I don't know, all those little connections were really fun to see in that scene.
It really is a filmographer type of, I suppose, trope or theme that they play around with, this idea of voyeurism. I mean, that's really what it is. Watching someone, the thrill is that they don't know they're being watched. And typically it leans to being kind of a sexual pleasure situation, which is very icky and gross. But that is something that one would discuss quite a bit in Hitchcock films. I only have one film class under my belt, and it's thanks to that class that I even watched Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock. So thanks, past self, for taking that class, because now I'm kind of prepared for this discussion. But one of the big things we talked about was how voyeuristic the experience is when you are looking at these scenes in isolation. A lot of times it is a man who is watching this woman, and multiple times we've only seen him really observing women. His intention was only to observe Grace, and then his voyeuristic experience was halted and kind of altered, where he no longer was finding the pleasure in it when he discovered there was a man in the picture, and obviously was participating in, having sexual intercourse with Grace, and that ended up causing this entire issue. So I think that that's really interesting, where we see this male figure who is obviously feeling as though he has been trodden on society. He's also viewed as weak by many of the characters, and part of the reason why he's bringing them here is not just to show his prowess, but to get back at them and show that he is in control and that he is powerful in some way. And a lot of them see that too. A lot of times when he's going off and showing his knowledge or taking control of the conversation, a lot of times we're in Zoe's perspective. She's thinking, here he goes. Here he goes trying to monologue at us, when in reality it's an insecurity, because he
Yeah.
clearly feels his inferiority towards these characters. It's just, there's a lot of layers to this narrative for sure. But I think this may be time that we should wrap up the episode for the first act of the Hitchcock Hotel. And to do so, as we always do, we have 3 categories that we have to answer. And if you all at home want to do it as well, please feel free, either write in, or if there is a comment section, please provide it depending on where you're listening. The first question doesn't have to be answered in this order, but this is how I'm declaring it, is your current rating. Where are you feeling your rating is at this first section of the book? Your favorite character. Who are you really appreciating so far? I know we've been discussing unlikable characters, so might be a hard one to answer this time around. And then finally, what questions do you have? What predictions do you have moving into Act 2? Danny, take it away.
Ooh, well, I would say for my rating, right now I'm stuck between a 3.75 and a 4. I'm leaning more towards a 4 after discussing it, to be honest, because there are a lot of little elements that I have enjoyed about the storyline. I think that it's a very easy read, and I think that maybe is because it's not really complex, but there are like little intricacies that I think I just needed to like sit with for a little bit. I think that's why I was coming into this conversation thinking it was more of a 3 star, but I don't know. I think it could definitely move up. And I'm gonna say, like, since I have to make a decision, I'm gonna say that it's a 4 star currently. And I think it could go up with what exactly happens, how intricate the plot is, what the reasoning is behind Alfred's decisions. Could definitely change my direction on my rating. We'll see. As far as my favorite character, I'm gonna give 2 answers for this. So I'm gonna give a favorite character and then a character that I am most intrigued by. I'll do that. So my favorite character, as far as likability goes, the character I do like the most, we've talked about this, is Samira. I do think that she has more endearing qualities in her than all of the other characters. I didn't mind being in her head. Her um, story about her and her husband splitting up amicably, and now she has this situation where she is pregnant. They have like one last hurrah, like the moment before they signed their divorce decree, and then now she knows that she's pregnant. And so I have really enjoyed her character. As far as the one I'm most intrigued by, I'm gonna throw Danny out there. I find her odd. And we don't know a lot about her. We don't have a backstory for her yet. And I think that she's a little bit of an odd duck. She's very protective of Alfred, and I want to know why. And then questions, predictions. My prediction will be, I think Grace is going to be the one that dies. I think and I guess I'll make a double prediction. She's either going to be the one who gets murdered, or she will be fake murdered. Like it will be she's gonna pretend to be a body essentially to gain notoriety of this hotel and freak out all of her friends. One of those 2 things I feel like is going to happen because that could potentially be the secret between Alfred and Grace is that she's gonna be the corpse. So I think, yeah, that would be my prediction. My question, why invite these people who you really don't enjoy to spend a weekend with? Why not just forget about it and be successful? So, we'll see. What about you? What are you thinking?
Yeah, when it comes to our discussion of this book, I agree that it has enhanced my experience so far with the book. For my rating, I think I'm still going to put it at a tentative 3.75 because I don't trust books that lean thriller. I know this is for our horror mystery month, but there's just a lot of thriller going on, and I'm like, you need to
Yeah.
prove yourself to me a bit further. But I love that our discussions is proving that there's far more to the experience of reading this. And I think it shows that this is a good book for book clubs. This would be an excellent book to read with people rather than in isolation because of all of the elements that you can kind of discuss and investigate and just pick on the various characters that are there, even though it is a very easy read. I think that speaks to the fact that we are dealing with short chapters and a lot
Yeah.
of them are kind of action focused. These characters do have backstories, but arguably their motivations aren't that complex. It seems as though their reactions are very straightforward, and we have seen this storyline before, so maybe that's why it's very palatable and easy to read as well. So I'm tentatively saying a 3.75, but if our discussions continue to be this way, where we keep going off of each other's ideas and seeing how rich the storyline actually is, yeah, I could totally see this going up. I don't trust thrillers, and that's what this is feeling right now. So there we are with that. As far as most intriguing character and most likable character, because I will follow suit with you, I'm going to give the same answers. Samira for the same reasons. She really is the most likable character in the bunch. I did find her voice to be a little bit overdone at times, but then it actually ends up being this nice reprieve compared to just how gloomy everyone else is. I
Yeah.
like that she's our shining light, even as she's dealing with very human things, you know, an unexpected pregnancy, her trying to figure out what's going on, even though she arguably is the person who has her life the most together, which is really lovely. So I am glad that we have her character as a bit of a reprieve. I hope that continues. And I'm intrigued by Danny as well, especially because she seems unhinged. If we're going to be completely honest, they had this discussion at dinner about the best way to murder someone and get away with it. And of course,
Yes.
everyone's throwing different ideas. Alfred throws it to Danny for some reason. Everyone's like, "Oh yeah, she's in here," because no one notices the help, which I think is a really lovely, like a lovely layer too, to like what she's up to, because no one notices the staff, no one notices the housekeeper who's getting into all of their dirty laundry. But she ends up bringing out this crazy idea of, well, the idea is more so just to get away quickly, so you could just shoot him and just get away quickly. And I think there's this really odd moment where I think it might have been with Zoe. She ends up bringing Zoe, a drink of water. And her parting words are, "I liked your idea of the melting ice pick." And that's it. She just walks away. And it's like, wow, that woman she is something. I think I understand why she gets along with Alfred because they're both just a little bit odd, not understood. But I do find her very intriguing. I'm sure we're going to get a bigger backstory with her. I think that might be one of the quote unquote reveals where we just learn more about her motivation. Why is she a housekeeper at this random hotel? And then when it comes to predictions and questions, I like your prediction. I would love to see this actually progress into an and then there were none situation where it ends up being that technically everyone's supposed to die. It's just who's going to die, when. And obviously, there is this suggestion of Alfred wanting it to be a memorable weekend, a weekend that will make it to media outlets because he was saying that the hotel is pretty much losing money. It's no longer a novelty. And so his goal this weekend, he said, we don't know how he's going to do it, but he wants this to be a memorable weekend where people come because of the disaster or the thing that happens. So he obviously plans something horrible. It could be a question of maybe he has convinced Grace to play a dead body but she does end up being dead or something like that. Like something else happens where she and he think it's going to be a trick, or she at least thinks it's going to be a trick, and then she ends up dying, something to that effect. I don't know. I could totally see that happening where suddenly Alfred is like, this isn't going to plan. I'm not in control. Now it's getting out of hand what's going on. So that would be really
Yeah.
interesting. I'm hoping for multiple bodies. I always am. I want to see a few people die. I could see Zoe making it to the end. She just, because she's one of our first POVs, I just, for some reason, I feel like she must survive. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that once you get a character like that, I feel like I expect her to survive. And then a question I have, let me see, what could I ask? I want to know how important, if anything, the flashback to that university classroom scene was with that professor. We had a few pages of this professor introducing the fact that he is, their first experience at a film class, what his intentions are for them, that he brings his dogs in to watch the films. He just seemed like a really personable professor that everyone remembers quite vividly. And I'm just thinking, why would we be introduced to him if we never? So I'm assuming slash wondering if we're going to get more flashbacks to that specific classroom, and then we'll see more interactions with that professor. And is the disastrous thing linked to him? That would be very sad because he seemed like a really lovely professor. So I'm gonna I'm making some sad predictions as well at the end of this episode. But thank you all so much for getting to the end. We really hope to see you next Friday, where we will be discussing the second act. So it's another approximately 100 pages. Make sure that you get started so you can be ready to discuss with us in the comments. And also, don't forget, check out the description because we do have all of the titles listed for translations, and you're going to want to put your holds in for the library with Inkheart pretty soon. So, yeah, thank you all so much and happy reading. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra _ the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.